The operating room was a slaughterhouse. Blood slicked the floor, covering the boots of the frantic medical team. In the center of the chaos stood Dr. Halloway, a surgeon with hands of gold and a god complex to match. He turned, eyes blazing with rage, and screamed the words that would end his career. "Get the F***CK out, nurse. You're useless." He pointed at the door, banishing the one woman keeping the patient alive. But as the nurse turned to leave, the dying Navy SEAL on the table, a man with half his face blown away, reached out a trembling hand, grabbed her wrist, and whispered a single word that froze the entire room. It wasn't her name. It was a call sign classified top secret for 6 years. And it changed everything. The heat in Kandahar didn't just sit on you. It oppressed you. It was a physical weight, pressing down on the canvas tents of the Forward Surgical Team, FST unit, smelling of burning diesel, stale sweat, and the metallic tang of old blood. Sarah Bennett adjusted her surgical mask, feeling the sweat trickle down her spine. She had been on her feet for 14 hours. Her scrubs, once a crisp blue, were stained with dark patches that had dried hours ago. She wasn't military. Not anymore. She was a civilian contractor, a trauma nurse, hired for her ability to keep calm when the world was exploding. But tonight, the world wasn't just exploding. It was disintegrating. "Suction, Bennett. Are you asleep or just stupid?" The voice cut through the hum of the generator. Dr. Richard Halloway stood over the open abdomen of a young Marine private, his gloved hands moving with a frenetic, angry energy. Halloway was brilliant. He was also a nightmare. He had come from a prestigious residency at Johns Hopkins, drafted into this hellhole to pay off student loans, and he made sure everyone knew he was too good for the dust and the gore. "Suctioning, doctor," Sarah said, her voice flat. She moved the tip of the suction catheter, clearing the field of view. She didn't flinch at his tone. She had been dealing with Halloway for 6 months. He was a man who treated nurses like furniture, necessary but easily replaced and incapable of thought. "BP is dropping," announced the anesthesiologist, a weary major named Tom Walker. 80 over 40. He's wet. We need to close." "I'm not done," Halloway snapped. "I haven't found the bleeder in the mesentery. If I close him now, he dies in recovery. Do you want that on your conscience, Tom? Because I don't." Sarah watched Halloway's hands. They were shaking, just a fraction. But she saw it. The surgeon was tired, and when Halloway got tired, he got mean. "Clamp," Halloway barked. Sarah slapped the hemostat into his palm instantly. "Not that one. The curved Kelly. God, do I have to do everything myself?" He threw the instrument onto the sterile tray with a clang that made the scrub tech flinch. Sarah handed him the curved Kelly without a word. She knew the anatomy better than he did. She knew that the bleeder wasn't in the mesentery. It was a retroperitoneal nick he'd missed 5 minutes ago. But telling Halloway he was wrong was like trying to pet a rabid dog. "Doctor," Sarah said softly, "check the retroperitoneal space, near the kidney." Halloway froze. He looked up, his eyes visible above his mask, narrowing into slits of pure venom. "Excuse me? Did you go to medical school, Bennett? Did I miss your graduation?" "No, doctor, but then shut your mouth and let me operate." He dove back in, ignoring her advice. 10 minutes passed. The Marine's pressure continued to tank. Suddenly the overhead comms crackled to life. "Inbound. Inbound. Dustoff 40. ETA-2 mics. We have a priority alpha. Catastrophic trauma. Multiple GSWs. Blast injury. Patient is unstable." The room tensed. A priority alpha usually meant special forces. High value, high stakes. "Great," Halloway muttered, finally tying off a vessel that wasn't the source of the main bleed. "Just what I need. More cowboys playing hero." "We need to clear this table," Sarah said, urgency creeping into her voice. "Doctor, pack him and ship him. We can't take a polytrauma with this kid open." "I decide when we clear the table," Halloway shouted. But Major Walker intervened. "He's right, Rick. The kid is stable enough. Pack him. We have a SEAL coming in." Halloway cursed, throwing his needle driver down. "Fine, pack him. Bennett, get this mess out of here. And if the next room isn't prepped in 3 minutes, I'm writing you up for negligence." Sarah didn't argue. She helped transfer the Marine, stripped the room, and began the frantic dance of sterilization and prep. 3 minutes later, the double doors burst open. The sound of the helicopter blades was deafening outside, whipping sand against the tent walls. 4 men in full combat gear rushed a stretcher in. The man on the gurney was a ruin. His tactical gear had been cut away, revealing a torso that looked like it had been put through a meat grinder. His left leg was tourniqueted high up the thigh. His face was covered in soot, oil and blood, swelling rapidly from a blast impact. "What do we have?" Halloway demanded, stepping up to the table, snapping on fresh gloves. One of the operators, a giant of a man with a beard caked in dust, gripped the side of the gurney. "IED ambush. Took 3 rounds to the chest plate, shrapnel to the neck and face. He's been down 20 minutes. Lost a lot of blood." "Name?" Halloway asked, assessing the damage. "Classified," the operator growled. "Just fix him." Halloway scoffed. "I can't treat a ghost. I need a medical history. Allergies. Blood type." "His blood type is O-neg," the operator said. "No allergies. Fix him." Halloway rolled his eyes. "Get these GI Joes out of my OR. Bennett, prep the neck. I'm going in." Sarah moved to the head of the bed. She looked down at the patient. His eyes were swollen shut. His breathing was ragged, bubbling through the blood in his throat. As she took the shears to cut away the remnants of his undershirt, her hand brushed against a tattoo on his left bicep. It was obscured by dirt, but the shape was distinctive. A trident. But not just a trident, interwoven with a lightning bolt and a specific set of coordinates. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that tattoo. She had seen the design sketch on a napkin in a bar in Virginia Beach 5 years ago. She looked at the man's face again. The swelling made him unrecognizable. But the hands. She looked at his right hand. The ring finger was crooked, having been broken and healed poorly years ago. "No," she thought. "Please God, no." "Bennett!" Halloway screamed. "Why is the neck not prepped? Are you trying to kill him?" Sarah snapped back to reality. "Prepping now." She worked fast, her hands trembling for the first time in years. As she scrubbed the iodine over the skin, she leaned close to the patient's ear. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the monitors. "Don't you dare quit on me." The surgery began, and from the very first cut, it went wrong. The bullet had shattered the clavicle and nicked the subclavian artery. It was a torrential bleed. As soon as Halloway made the incision, blood geysered up, hitting his loops. "Suction! Goddammit, suction!" Halloway roared. Sarah was already there, the Yankauer tip diving into the pool of red. "I can't clear it fast enough, doctor. You need to clamp blindly or we lose him." "I don't clamp blindly. I am a surgeon, not a butcher." Halloway was panicking. Sarah could see it. He was out of his depth. The damage was too extensive, the anatomy too distorted by the blast. "BP is 60 over palp," Walker announced, his voice tight. "He's coding, Rick. Do something." "I can't see." Halloway threw a soiled lap pad onto the floor. "Bennett, get in there with the retractor. Pull it back. Harder." Sarah dug the retractor in, pulling the muscle tissue back with all her strength. "I've got it. The artery is retracted under the bone. You have to go under." "Don't tell me where to go." Halloway was sweating profusely now. A drop of sweat fell from his forehead, missing the open wound by an inch. "He's moving. Why is he moving? Walker, paralyze him." "He is paralyzed, Rick. He's burning through the meds. His metabolism is through the roof." The patient on the table bucked. A guttural sound escaped the intubation tube. The monitor began to scream a high-pitched warning. "V-fib." "Shock him!" Halloway yelled, stepping back, hands in the air. Sarah grabbed the paddles. "Charging to 200! Clear!" The body arched off the table. "Still in V-fib," Walker said. "Pushing EPI." "Again!" Halloway screamed. "Shock him again!" "Charging! Clear!" The body jumped. Sinus rhythm. Walker breathed a sigh of relief. We got him back. BP is stabilizing. Barely. Halloway leaned over the table, panting. Okay, I'm going for the artery. He reached in with the forceps. His hand was shaking violently now. He nipped at the tissue. Doctor, Sarah said, her voice low and dangerous. You're too close to the brachial plexus. If you clip that nerve, he loses the use of his arm. For a SEAL, that's a death sentence. Halloway stopped. He looked up at Sarah. The sheer audacity of a nurse correcting him in the middle of a crisis broke something inside him. His ego, already fragile from the near death of the patient, shattered into pure rage. You think you know better than me? Halloway hissed. I know you're shaking, Sarah said, her eyes locking onto his. And I know you're about to end this man's career because you're too proud to ask for the vascular surgeon. The vascular surgeon is in another tent, Halloway shouted. I am the attending here. Me! He plunged the forceps back in. No! Sarah reached out and physically grabbed Halloway's wrist. It was a reflex, a violation of every protocol in the medical world. You never touch the surgeon. The room went silent. The scrub tech gasped. Walker stopped adjusting the dials. Halloway stared at her hand on his wrist. His face turned a deep, violent shade of red. He ripped his arm away, flinging blood across Sarah's face. Get the F*CK out, nurse. The scream tore through the throat. You are fired. You are done. Get out of my OR, now. Halloway pointed a bloodied instrument at the door. Get out before I have the MPs drag you out. Sarah stood her ground for a second, her chest heaving. Doctor, you're going to kill him. Out! Halloway shrieked, his voice cracking. Sarah looked at Walker. The anesthesiologist looked down, unable to meet her gaze. He wasn't going to stand up to Halloway. Not here. Defeated, Sarah stepped back from the table. She ripped off her bloody gloves and threw them into the bin. She reached up to untie her mask. Good luck, she whispered to the room. She turned and walked toward the double doors. The sound of her boots on the linoleum was the only noise other than the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. She reached for the handle. Shh. The sound came from the table. It was a wet, gargling noise. Halloway froze. Walker, is he waking up again? I don't know. Sedation is maxed out. Sarah stopped. Her hand hovered over the door handle. The patient's right hand, the one with the crooked finger, shot up from the restraint. It flailed blindly in the air, searching. Restrain him, Halloway yelled. Tech, grab his arm. The scrub tech moved, but the patient was faster. His hand swung out, knocking a tray of instruments to the floor with a crash. He was fighting the anesthesia with a willpower that defied physiology. He wasn't reaching for the doctor. He was reaching towards the door, toward Sarah. Sarah turned around. She couldn't leave. The patient's head turned slightly, fighting the neck brace. His eyes cracked open, slits of blue in a mask of blood and swelling. He couldn't see clearly, but he seemed to sense her presence. He choked against the tube, his chest heaving. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, he managed to bypass the tube enough to form a sound. It wasn't a groan. It was a word. Sparrow. The word hung in the air. Halloway looked confused. What did he say? Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees went weak. The patient's hand clawed at the air again. Sparrow, don't fly. Halloway looked from the patient to Sarah. What is he talking about? Is that you? Sarah didn't answer the doctor. She walked back to the table, ignoring Halloway's protests. She took the patient's bloody, trembling hand in hers. I'm here, she said, her voice breaking. I'm here, Echo. I'm not flying anywhere. The patient's hand squeezed hers with a crushing grip, then relaxed. His heart rate on the monitor, which had been spiking to 160, instantly dropped to a steady 90. Halloway stood there, mouth open. Echo? Sparrow? What the hell is going on here, Bennett? Sarah looked up at the surgeon. The fear was gone from her eyes. In its place was a cold, steely authority that didn't belong to a civilian nurse. My name isn't Bennett, doctor, she said, And if you want this man to live, you're going to step aside and let me guide your hand, because I'm the only one in this room who knows exactly where that bullet is. 5 years earlier, San Diego, California, the bar was called the Rusty Anchor. It was a dive, the kind of place where the floor was sticky with spilled beer and the jukebox only played songs released before 1990. It was also the unofficial sanctuary for SEAL Team 4. Sarah Jenkins, not Bennett, not yet, sat in the back booth, nursing a lukewarm beer. She wore a flight suit, unzipped to the waist, revealing a black tank top. She was 26, a lieutenant in the Air Force Pararescue, PJ support unit. She wasn't a PJ herself. Women weren't allowed in the pipeline yet. But she was a flight nurse with the 304th Rescue Squadron. She was the one who kept you alive in the back of the Pavehawk while the world burned outside. "You look like you're plotting a murder," a voice drawled. Sarah looked up. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Caleb Doherty, call sign, Echo. He held 2 shots of whiskey. "Just thinking about the training op tomorrow," Sarah said, accepting the drink he slid toward her. "I hear you SEALs are going to try and make my life miserable." Caleb grinned, a lopsided, boyish expression that didn't match the deadly seriousness of his eyes. "We don't try, Lieutenant. We succeed. We're going to simulate a catastrophic extract. You guys better be fast on the winch." "I'm always fast," Sarah challenged, clinking her glass against his. They drank. The burn was good. For the next 3 months, their worlds collided. Joint training exercises, late nights at the Anchor. Caleb was loud, brash, and dangerous. Sarah was quiet, observational, and sharp as a tack. They were opposites, and the attraction was magnetic. They broke the rules. Fraternization between branches during a joint task force workup was strictly forbidden. But they didn't care. They found stolen moments in equipment lockers, silent glances across briefing rooms, and long drives down the Pacific Coast Highway on the rare weekends off. He gave her the nickname Sparrow because she was small, quick, and always seemed to flutter around the most dangerous situations without getting caught. "Why Sparrow?" she had asked him one night, lying on the hood of his truck, watching the stars over the desert training ground. "Because sparrows are the only birds that don't worry about the storm," Caleb had said, tracing the line of her jaw. "They just ride the wind." Then came the mission, Operation Silent Thunder. It wasn't a training op. It was real, a high-value extraction in Yemen. Sarah was on the bird as the medical lead. Caleb was on the ground. It went sideways. Intel was bad. The LZ was hot. Sarah remembered the sound of the RPG hitting the tail rotor, the spin, the crash. She remembered crawling out of the burning wreckage, dragging the pilot. She remembered the gunfire closing in, and she remembered Caleb. He had abandoned the extraction of the target to run back for the crash site. He and his team formed a perimeter around the downed chopper. For 6 hours, they held off a force of 200 insurgents. During the firefight, Sarah wasn't just a nurse. She was a shooter. She picked up an M4 from a fallen soldier and held the left flank. She treated wounds under fire, tourniqueting legs while bullets snapped past her ears. When the QRF, Quick Reaction Force, finally arrived, Caleb was hit. A grazing shot to the head and shrapnel in the leg. Sarah treated him in the back of the second bird, her hands steady while her heart shattered. "You did good, Sparrow," he had mumbled before passing out. But the aftermath was brutal. The mission was classified. The crash was scrubbed from the records, and the relationship was discovered. The brass needed a scapegoat for the security breach that led to the ambush. They couldn't blame the SEALs. They were heroes. They looked at the Air Force support. They looked at the distraction of the relationship. Sarah was given a choice: dishonorable discharge and prison for compromising operational security, or a quiet resignation, a name change, and a ban from ever holding a military commission again. She took the resignation to save Caleb's career. If he had been implicated in the relationship, he would have lost his trident. She left San Diego in the middle of the night. She didn't say goodbye. She changed her name to Sarah Bennett, moved to Europe, and took contract jobs, hiding in the anonymity of the medical field. She thought she would never see him again. Back in the OR, Sarah looked at the man on the table, the man she had saved, the man she had left. Caleb Echo Doherty was dying under the hands of an arrogant surgeon who didn't know that the bullet in his chest was lodged next to a piece of shrapnel from Yemen, a piece of metal that had been there for 5 years. "Bennett," Holloway's voice brought her back to the bloody present. "I am waiting. You said you know where the bullet is. Prove it or get out." Sarah took a deep breath. She stepped up to the table directly opposite Holloway. She didn't look like a nurse anymore. She looked like the operator she had been for 6 hours in the desert. "The bullet didn't ricochet off the clavicle, Doctor," she said clearly. "It hit the old scar tissue on his second rib. It deflected downward, behind the lung. It's pressing on the azygos vein. If you pull that retractor any further, you'll tear the vein, and he'll bleed out in 10 seconds. Holloway stared at her. "How could you possibly know he has scar tissue there? It's not on the chart." "Because," Sarah said, picking up a fresh pair of gloves and snapping them on with a sound like a gunshot, "I was the one who stitched him up the first time he got shot there." She looked Holloway dead in the eye. "Now give me the suction. We're going in." The silence in the operating room was heavier than the lead aprons hanging on the wall. It wasn't the quiet of concentration. It was the suffocating stillness of a standoff. Dr. Richard Holloway stared at Sarah Bennett, or Sarah Jenkins, or Sparrow, whatever name this ghost of a woman was using. His ego was screaming at him to throw her out, to call the MPs, to have her dragged away in handcuffs for insubordination. He was the surgeon. He was the god of this sterile white box. But his hands were still shaking, and the monitor was still chirping a rhythm that was far too fast and far too weak. "You're insane," Holloway whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think because you put a Band-Aid on him 5 years ago, you know his thoracic anatomy better than a board-certified trauma surgeon?" "I don't think," Sarah said, her voice ice-cold. "I know, and I know that right now you're looking for the bleeder in the wrong plane. You're dissecting the anterior mediastinum. The bullet is posterior. It's behind the hilum of the lung." "That's impossible," Holloway snapped, though he didn't move his instruments. The trajectory was frontal. "The bullet tumbled," Sarah countered. "It hit the rib, shattered, and the core rode the rib cage back. It's sitting right on top of the azygos arch. If you keep digging where you are, you're going to nick the superior vena cava. If you do that, he bleeds out in 4 seconds, and no amount of epinephrine in the world will bring him back." She took a step closer, invading his sterile space, her eyes locked on his above her mask. "Give me the retractor, Doctor. Let me show you." Major Walker, the anesthesiologist, cleared his throat. It was a nervous, dry sound. "Rick, his saturation is dropping again. 88%. We don't have time for a debate. If she's wrong, she's wrong. But if she's right..." Holloway looked at the monitor, then at the bloody mess inside the patient's chest cavity. He was lost. He knew it. The anatomy was a soup of hematoma and shredded muscle. He couldn't distinguish the landmarks. The fear of killing a Navy SEAL, and the investigation that would follow, was suddenly stronger than his pride. "Fine," Holloway hissed, stepping back slightly but not relinquishing the lead spot. "Show me. But if you contaminate this field, I will personally ensure you never work in healthcare again. Not even changing bedpans." Sarah didn't answer. She didn't care about her career. She cared about the man on the table, whose heart was beating a frantic rhythm against the odds. She reached in. Her hands, unlike Holloway's, were rock steady. Flashback. 6 years ago. The flight line in Kandahar. It was 0200 hours. The air smelled of jet fuel and ozone. Sarah was sitting on the ramp of a C-130, smoking a cigarette she didn't really want, just to feel the burn in her lungs. Caleb sat down next to her. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, cleaning his rifle, the rhythmic click-clack of the bolt the only sound in the night. "You know," he finally said, his voice low, "most people look at us like we're heroes. Or monsters." "And what are you?" Sarah asked, blowing smoke into the darkness. "I'm just a guy who's really good at breaking things," Caleb said, looking at her. "But you fix things. That makes you the dangerous one." "Why?" "Because you give us hope, and hope gets you killed in my line of work." Sarah had stubbed out the cigarette. "Then don't hope, Echo. Just trust. Trust that when you break, I'll be there to put the pieces back together." He had smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Is that a promise, Sparrow?" "That's a protocol." Back in the OR. "Retractor," Sarah demanded. The scrub tech, a young corporal named Miller, who looked like he was about to vomit, handed it to her. Sarah inserted the blade of the retractor gently. She didn't pull. She waited. She let the tissue relax, sensing the tension in the muscle fibers. This was the difference between a technician and an artist. Halloway hacked. Sarah negotiated with the body. "Light!" she commanded. Halloway adjusted the overhead lamp, almost obediently. "Look," Sarah whispered. She applied pressure, pulling the lung tissue aside. There, deep in the cavity, obscured by a clot the size of a fist, was the glint of metal. But it wasn't just the bullet. The bullet was lodged against a jagged piece of old silvery metal, shrapnel that had been encapsulated in scar tissue for years. The impact had torn the scar tissue open, and the jagged edge of the old shrapnel was sawing against the wall of the azygos vein with every heartbeat. "My God," Walker breathed from behind the drape. "It's pulsing." "He has a pseudo-aneurysm," Halloway said, his eyes widening. "It's about to burst. If you had pulled the lung the way you were planning," Sarah said softly, "you would have ripped that open." Halloway was silent. He stared at the ticking time bomb inside the SEAL's chest. The artery wall was paper-thin, bulging rhythmically. One wrong touch, one tremor, and the blood would fill the chest cavity instantly. "I can't clamp that," Halloway stammered. "There's no room. The angle is too steep." "You don't clamp it," Sarah said. "You have to suture it, in situ, while it's beating. That requires a vascular specialist. I'm a general trauma surgeon." Halloway's panic was rising again. "We need to stabilize and transport." "He won't make the transport," Sarah said. "It bursts in the helicopter. He dies. We do it now." "I can't," Halloway shouted. "My hands. I can't get the angle." Sarah looked at him. She saw the defeat in his eyes. He was broken. The pressure had crushed him. "Then move," Sarah said. "What?" "I said move. I'll guide the needle driver. You hold the retractor." "You cannot perform surgery," Halloway screeched. "It's illegal. It's—" "Do you want to explain to his team outside why he bled out on the table while you argued about protocol?" Sarah asked. "Or do you want to take credit for a miraculous save?" Halloway hesitated. He looked at the door. He imagined the 4 Navy SEALs pacing in the hallway. He imagined their faces if he walked out and told them their leader was dead. He stepped back. He handed her the needle driver. "If he dies," Halloway whispered, sweat dripping from his nose, "I will testify that you pushed me aside and murdered him." "If he dies," Sarah said, gripping the instrument, "I won't care what happens to me." She leaned in. The world narrowed down to a single square inch of red. She could feel Caleb's life force humming through the instrument. "Don't hope," she thought. "Just trust." She took a breath, held it, and made the first stitch. The vein wall was friable, crumbly and weak. She had to catch enough tissue to hold, but not enough to tear. It was like sewing wet tissue paper together while riding a roller coaster. Stitch, knot, cut. "BP holding," Walker said, his voice tight. Stitch, knot, cut. The aneurysm pulsed against her instrument. It was angry. "One more," Sarah whispered. Just one more, Echo. She looped the suture material. She felt the resistance. She threw the knot. Release the clamp, she said. Halloway, who had been holding the proximal clamp with white-knuckled fear, slowly let go. The blood rushed back into the vessel. Sarah watched. Halloway watched. Walker stood on his tiptoes to see. The suture line held. No leak, no spray. Just the rhythmic, strong pulse of life. Dry, Halloway whispered. It's dry. Sarah exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that emptied her lungs. She stepped back, dropping the needle driver onto the tray. Close him up, Doctor, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. You can handle the skin, can't you? Halloway looked at her. For a second, there was something like respect in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, hard realization of what had just happened. A nurse had humiliated him. A nurse had done his job, and that was unforgivable. Get out, Halloway muttered, turning his back to her to begin the closing sutures. Get out of my OR, and don't think this is over. Sarah didn't argue. She stripped off her gown, her gloves, her mask. She walked to the door. She paused at the threshold and looked back at Caleb. The rise and fall of his chest was steady now. He was alive. I kept the protocol, Echo, she whispered. Then she walked out into the blinding Afghan sun, knowing her life was about to fall apart all over again. The recovery tent was dimmer than the OR, lit by soft blue tactical lights. The hum of the air conditioning units was a constant drone, masking the sounds of the war outside. Sarah sat on a folding metal chair next to bed 3. She shouldn't have been there. Halloway had technically fired her an hour ago, but in a combat zone, paperwork moved slower than rumors, and no one had come to escort her out yet. Besides, the MPs were busy. Outside the tent, 4 men stood guard. They weren't MPs. They were the rest of Caleb's team. They hadn't taken off their gear. They still wore their plate carriers, their helmets clipped to their belts, their weapons slung tight against their chests. They were a wall of silent intimidation. Every time a doctor or nurse tried to enter the recovery area, they were stopped, questioned, and stared down until they stammered their business, except for Sarah. When she had walked out of the OR, covered in sweat and blood, the giant bearded operator, the one who had brought Caleb in, had looked at her. How is he? The giant asked. His name tape read Maddox. He's stable, Sarah had said, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. The bleeding stopped. He'll keep the arm. Maddox had studied her face for a long moment. He saw the tremor in her hands. He saw the exhaustion. And he saw something else. The 1,000-yard stare of someone who had been in the shit. Good, Maddox said. You stay with him. The surgeon fired me, Sarah said with a dry laugh. The surgeon is a mechanic, Maddox growled. You're the one who walked out with blood on your face and didn't look like you were gonna puke. You stay with him. So she stayed. Now, 2 hours post-op, Caleb stirred. The anesthesia was wearing off. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. Sarah leaned forward, placing a hand on his uninjured shoulder. Easy, Echo. Easy. You're safe. You're at the FST. Caleb blinked. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry as sand. He licked his cracked lips. Water, he rasped. Sarah dipped a sponge on a stick into a cup of water and wet his lips. Slowly. Don't choke. Caleb's eyes started to focus. He looked at the tent ceiling, then at the IV lines, and finally he turned his head to look at her. For a long minute, there was no recognition. Just the confusion of a man waking up from trauma. Then the fog cleared. His blue eyes widened. He blinked hard, as if trying to erase a hallucination. Sparrow? The word was a ghost, barely audible. Sarah smiled, a sad, broken smile. Hey, Echo. Long time. Caleb tried to sit up, but the pain slammed him back down. He groaned, gritting his teeth. What? How? You got blown up, Sarah said gently. Again. You really need to stop catching bullets, Caleb. It's bad for your health. I thought you were in Germany, Caleb whispered. I looked for you. For 3 years I looked for you. Sarah looked away. The guilt was a physical pang in her chest. I couldn't be found, Caleb. You know that. If I stayed, you lost your trident. If I left, you got to keep being a hero. Caleb reached out with his good hand. His fingers, calloused and rough, brushed her cheek. I didn't want to be a hero. I wanted you. We don't always get what we want, Sarah said, her voice trembling. We get the mission. Screw the mission, Caleb said, his voice gaining strength. Why are you here? In this hellhole? Running, she admitted. Same as you. Before they could say more, the tent flap flew open with a violent zip. Dr. Halloway marched in. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by the base commander, Colonel Reynolds, and 2 MPs. Halloway pointed a finger at Sarah. That's her. That is the woman who assaulted me in the OR and performed unauthorized surgical procedures. I want her arrested immediately. Sarah stood up slowly. She didn't back away. Colonel Reynolds, a tired-looking man with grey hair, looked at Sarah. Miss Bennet? Is this true? I didn't assault him, Sarah said calmly, and I didn't perform surgery. I assisted. Liar! Halloway screamed. His face was purple. She took the needle driver. She sutured the vessel. She hijacked my operation. She is a liability and a danger to every patient in this facility. He turned to the MPs. Get her out of here. Handcuff her. The MPs stepped forward, hands on their batons. Miss Bennet, the colonel said sternly, you are to come with us. You are relieved of duty pending an investigation. Sarah looked at Caleb. His eyes were burning with rage, but he was too weak to move. It's okay, Sarah said to him. Rest, recover. She held out her hands to the MPs. I'll go. No, a deep voice rumbled from the entrance. Maddox and the other 3 SEALs stepped into the tent. They filled the space, their sheer physical presence sucking the air out of the room. Maddox walked past the colonel, past the MPs, and stood directly in front of Halloway. He towered over the surgeon by a good 6 inches. There seems to be a misunderstanding, Maddox said, his voice deceptively polite. This is none of your business, Sergeant, Halloway spat. This is a medical personnel matter. Actually, Maddox said, it is our business, because that man in the bed is my team leader, and he just told us something very interesting. Maddox turned to look at Sarah, then back to the colonel. Colonel, Maddox said, my boss is awake, and he says that this woman didn't assault the doctor. He says the doctor panicked. He says the doctor was going to let him die. Halloway went pale. The patient was sedated. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's hallucinating. Echo doesn't hallucinate. Another SEAL, a sniper named Tex, drawled from the corner. He observes. Maddox leaned in close to Halloway. If you touch her, or if you try to remove her from this tent, we will have a problem. A very loud, very public problem, involving the Judge Advocate General and a detailed report about your incompetence. The colonel looked between the SEALs and the surgeon. He knew who held the real power here. Special Operations Command had a long reach. Dr. Halloway, the colonel said, clearing his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office, without the MPs. Halloway looked like he was about to explode. You're taking the word of a drugged patient over a surgeon? I'm taking the word of a Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander, the colonel corrected. Now, office. Halloway glared at Sarah with pure hatred. You got lucky, nurse, but you're finished. I'll make sure of it. He stormed out, the colonel following him. The MPs looked at Maddox, shrugged, and left. Sarah exhaled, her legs giving way. She sat back down heavily on the chair. Maddox looked at her. You got friends in high places, Sparrow, or at least dangerous places. I don't have friends, Sarah said quietly. I have ghosts. Caleb groaned from the bed. Maddox. Boss? Clear the room, Caleb whispered. I need to talk to her. Alone. Top secret clearance only. Maddox raised an eyebrow. She's a civvy, boss. She doesn't have clearance. Caleb looked at Sarah. The intensity in his eyes was frightening. She has higher clearance than you do, Caleb said. Now get out. The SEALs looked at each other, confused, but they didn't disobey. They filed out, leaving Sarah and Caleb alone in the dim blue light. "What are you doing, Caleb?" Sarah asked. "I don't have clearance." "You do now," Caleb said. He struggled to reach into the pouch tied to the side of the bed rail, where his personal effects had been dumped. He pulled out a small, blood-stained laminated card. He held it out to her. "Look at it." Sarah took the card. It was a photo of a man. A target. "Who is this?" she asked. "That," Caleb said, his voice grim, "is the man we were hunting. The man who set the ambush." Sarah looked closer. The face was familiar. Terrifyingly familiar. It wasn't an insurgent leader. It wasn't a terrorist warlord. It was a man she had seen 2 days ago, walking through the base, wearing a suit, shaking hands with the colonel. "That's," Sarah stammered, "that's the CIA station chief, Miller." "Exactly," Caleb said. "We weren't hit by the Taliban, Sarah. We were set up by our own side, and now—" He looked at the tent entrance. "Now they know I'm alive, which means they know the job isn't finished." He grabbed her hand, his grip desperate. "Holloway trying to fire you is the least of your problems, Sparrow. Because in about an hour, the people who tried to kill me are going to come through that door to finish the job. And if you're standing here, they're going to kill you too." The air in the recovery tent grew thin, charged with a static electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Sarah looked at the photo of Station Chief Miller, then at Caleb. The monitor beeped steadily, a metronome counting down the seconds of a life that was suddenly, violently, fragile. "If Miller is here," Sarah whispered, her mind racing through tactical protocols she hadn't used in years, "then he controls the perimeter. He controls the comms. We can't just walk out." "We have to," Caleb gritted out, trying to swing his legs over the side of the bed. The movement turned his face grey with pain. He slumped back, gasping. "Damn it! My legs! They're gone." "The spinal block hasn't worn off yet," Sarah said, pushing him back down gently but firmly. "You can't walk, Echo. You're dead weight." "Then leave me," Caleb ordered. "Go to the command post. Find General Stanton. He's the only one Miller can't touch." "I don't leave my wingman," Sarah said, her voice hard. "Rule number 1. She scanned the room. It was a soft-walled tent. No cover, no hard points, just canvas and medical equipment. If a shooter came through that door, they were fish in a barrel. "Where is your team?" Sarah asked. "Maddox took them to the TOC, Tactical Operations Center, to secure the comms log," Caleb said. "If Miller is smart, he'll have them detained or diverted. We're on our own." Suddenly the hum of the air conditioner died. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then cut out completely. The tent plunged into darkness, save for the faint, battery-powered glow of the cardiac monitor. "He's here," Caleb whispered. "That wasn't a power failure, that was a cut." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands moved with automatic precision. She reached for the instrument tray Holloway had left behind. She grabbed the heavy Mayo stand, a metal tray on wheels, and silently rolled it in front of the door. It was a flimsy barricade, but it would make noise. She then grabbed a scalpel. It felt small in her hand, pathetic against a suppressed pistol or a rifle, but it was all she had. "Get under the bed," Sarah hissed to Caleb. "I can't move." "Roll!" She shoved him. Caleb groaned, a sound of pure agony, as he tumbled off the mattress and hit the floor with a thud. She threw the blanket over the empty pillows to make it look like a sleeping form. She crouched in the shadows behind the ventilator, gripping the scalpel. The zipper of the tent entrance hissed. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Someone was opening the door, but they weren't announcing themselves. A figure stepped inside. Silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through the canvas, the man was tall. He wore the uniform of an MP, but he moved wrong. He didn't have the heavy, bored stomp of a guard. He moved on the balls of his feet. He held a pistol with a long suppressor screwed onto the barrel. The figure moved towards the bed. He raised the weapon. Thwip, thwip, 2 shots. Quiet coughs in the dark. The bullets tore into the pillows where Caleb's head had been seconds ago. Feathers puffed into the air, visible in the dim green light of the monitor. The assassin stepped closer to verify the kill. He leaned over the bed. "Clear," the assassin whispered into a headset. "Target is—" He paused. He saw the feathers. He saw the flat pillow. "Target is gone. I repeat, target is—" Sarah didn't wait. She launched herself from behind the ventilator. She wasn't a large woman, but she was a pararescue nurse. She had trained to drag 200-pound men out of burning fuselages. She had upper body strength that defied her frame. She slammed into the assassin's back, wrapping her left arm around his neck in a sleeper hold. With her right hand, she drove the scalpel down. The assassin was a professional. He didn't panic. He tucked his chin to protect his carotid artery. The scalpel slashed across his shoulder, cutting through the MP uniform, but missing the fatal vessels. He threw his weight backward, slamming Sarah into the metal instrument cart. The crash was deafening. Trays, forceps, and bowls clattered to the floor. Sarah lost her grip. She fell hard, the wind knocked out of her. The assassin spun around, leveling the gun. "You must be the nurse," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "Miller said you were a loose end." He aimed at her chest. Sarah looked at the gun. She couldn't move. Her ribs felt cracked. Bang! The shot was loud, unsuppressed. The assassin's head snapped back. A spray of red mist erupted behind him. He crumpled to the floor, his gun skittering away. Sarah gasped, scrambling backward. Standing in the entrance of the tent, holding a smoking service revolver, was Dr. Richard Halloway. The surgeon was shaking. He was wearing his white coat, now stained with sweat. He looked like he was about to vomit. Halloway stammered. He was going to kill you." Sarah stared at him. "Doctor?" Halloway dropped the gun as if it were burning him. I came back to get my phone. I forgot it. I saw him cut the power. I saw him sneak in." He looked down at the dead man. "Is that an MP?" Halloway asked, his voice rising in hysteria. "Did I just kill a military policeman?" "No," Sarah said, struggling to her feet. She went to the body and ripped the Velcro patch off the uniform. Underneath was a generic black tactical shirt. She checked the man's neck. No dog tags. Just a tattoo of a scorpion. "He's a contractor," Sarah said. "Mercenary. Hired by Miller." Caleb groaned from under the bed. "Sparrow, status?" "Target down," Sarah said. "Halloway shot him." "The butcher!" Caleb's voice was incredulous. Halloway was hyperventilating. "I'm a doctor. I take an oath. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. I just blew his brains out." Sarah grabbed Halloway by the lapels of his coat. She shook him hard. "Richard, listen to me." It was the first time she had used his first name. He blinked, focusing on her. "You didn't do harm," Sarah said fiercely. "You just saved 2 lives. You did the surgery. You cut out the cancer. Do you understand?" Halloway swallowed. He nodded slowly. "I saved the patient." "Yes," Sarah said. "Now, help me get him up. We have to move. Miller will know his cleaner failed." "Where do we go?" Halloway asked, looking at the gun on the floor with terror. "We go to the one place Miller won't look," Sarah said. "The morgue." The base morgue was a refrigerated shipping container, a cold steel box smelling of formaldehyde. It was the last place anyone would look for the living. They laid Caleb on a metal table. He was shivering, shock setting in. "The comms are jammed," Caleb rasped, clutching Sarah's hand. "Miller has a jammer on the water tower. If we don't signal Maddox, we die in here." "I can't fight a battalion," Sarah said, scanning the room. "I have a scalpel, not a radio." "Halloway," Caleb wheezed, looking at the terrified surgeon. "You have access to the oxygen storage next to the tower. I need you to create a diversion. A big one." Halloway recoiled. "You want me to blow up the water tower? I'm a doctor, not a demolitionist." Sarah stepped in, grabbing Halloway by the lapels of his ruined white coat. "Richard, listen to me. Miller will burn this entire unit to cover his treason. You are the only one who can walk around this base without being questioned. You have to do this." Halloway looked at his hands, hands that had saved a life in the OR and taken a life in the tent. He swallowed hard, nodding. "Give me the lighter." 10 minutes later, Sarah watched from the shadows of the container door. Halloway, a small figure in a white coat, fumbled with the valves of a massive oxygen tank at the base of the tower. He struck a flare. A blinding flash turned the night into day. Boom! The shockwave rattled the morgue. A fireball rolled into the sky as the fuel canisters ignited, melting the jammer's cabling instantly. The electronic silence broke. Sirens wailed, and chaos erupted across the camp. Sarah grabbed the dead assassin's radio. "Maddox, Sector 4 is compromised. We are in the morgue." Maddox's voice growled back, clear and angry. "Solid copy, Sparrow. We saw the fireworks. We're coming in hot." Minutes later, the morgue doors flew open. It wasn't Miller. It was Maddox, Tex, and the full fury of the SEAL team. "You look like hell, boss," Maddox grinned, securing the room. "Status on Miller?" Caleb asked. "Caught him trying to run to the perimeter," Maddox said darkly. "He won't be a problem anymore." Just then, Halloway stumbled in, soot-covered and eyebrows singed. "I did it," he wheezed. "I blew it up." Maddox clapped a massive hand on the surgeon's shoulder. "Good effect on target, Doc. You're a natural." Halloway straightened, finally looking the soldiers in the eye. "He needs evacuation, now." As they moved to the chopper, Sarah hung back. "You're safe, Echo. My job is done." "No," Caleb barked, stopping the team. "You're not running this time. Maddox, put her on the manifest." "She's a civilian, boss," Maddox noted. "She's the primary attending," Caleb said. "That's an order." Sarah looked at Halloway one last time. The surgeon, stripped of his arrogance, nodded at her. "Bennett, you were right about the anatomy. And I'm sorry." It was the apology of a lifetime. Sarah smiled. "You're a hell of a soldier, Doctor." 6 months later. The air in the Colorado mountains was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the dust of Afghanistan. Sarah sat on the porch of a cabin, watching the sun dip behind the pines. The screen door creaked and Caleb walked out. He used a cane, but he was moving well. The scars were fading. He tossed a thick envelope onto the table between them. "It came today," he said. Sarah picked it up. It was stamped with the Department of Defense seal. Inside was a formal reinstatement of her commission and a job offer, lead instructor for PJ trauma training. "They cleared you," Caleb said, sitting beside her. "Retroactively. Honorable discharge. You got your wings back, Sparrow." Sarah traced the seal with her thumb, tears stinging her eyes. "And you? Are you going back to the teams?" Caleb looked at his leg, then at her. "No. I've done enough breaking. I think I'm ready to try fixing things." He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. Besides, he smiled, the old charming grin returning. Sparrows shouldn't fly alone. Sarah squeezed his hand, the ghosts of the past finally silent. "Copy that, Echo," she whispered. "Copy that." And that is the story of Sarah Sparrow Jenkins and Caleb Echo Doherty. Dr. Halloway learned that a nurse isn't just an assistant. She's the line between life and death. And Sarah proved that true loyalty isn't about following orders. It's about doing what's right. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to break the rules to save someone? Until next time, stay safe.